Yeah, ma'am. So, പ്രിയപ്പെട്ടവരെ, പ്രിയപ്പെട്ട സഹാക്കളെ, സുഹൃത്തുക്കളെ, നമ്മൾ ഇന്ന് ഇവിടെ NEPക്കെതിരെ ഉള്ളൊരു വാരാചരണത്തിന്റെ ഭാഗമായി ന്യൂ എഡ്യൂക്കേഷൻ പോളിസിക്കെതിരെയുള്ള ഒരു വാരാചരണത്തിന്റെ ഭാഗമായി വിവിധ പരിപാടികൾ നടത്തി വരികയാണ്. സെമിനാറുകൾ, ടോക്ക് സീരീസുകൾ, അതുപോലെ പൊതുപരിപാടികളെല്ലാം. അപ്പോൾ അഖിലേന്ത്യാ തലത്തിൽ ഇങ്ങനെ പരിപാടികൾ നടക്കുന്നതിന്റെ ഭാഗമായി ഇന്ന് AIDSO കേരള ഇവിടെ നമുക്ക് ഹിസ്റ്ററി ആണ് പറ്റി, സാഫ്രനൈസേഷൻ ഓഫ് ഹിസ്റ്ററി ആൻഡ് എക്സാമിനേഷൻ ദ ലൈറ്റ് ഓഫ് ന്യൂ എഡ്യൂക്കേഷൻ പോളിസി 2020 എന്ന വിഷയത്തിൽ ഒരു ടോക്ക് ഹോസ്റ്റ് ചെയ്യാണ്. ഇതിൽ നമ്മളുടെ ഗസ്റ്റ് ആയിട്ട് വന്നിരിക്കുന്നത് പ്രൊഫസർ മഹാലക്ഷ്മി മാം ആണ്. മാം ജവഹർലാൽ നെഹ്റു യൂണിവേഴ്സിറ്റി ഡൽഹിയിലെ ഏൻഷ്യന്റ് ഇന്ത്യൻ ഹിസ്റ്ററി അധ്യാപികയാണ്. സെന്റർ ഫോർ ഹിസ്റ്റോറിക്കൽ സ്റ്റഡീസിലെ മാം ആണ് നമുക്ക് ഗസ്റ്റ് ആയിട്ട് ഇവിടെ എത്തിയിരിക്കുന്നത്. മാമിനെ ഇൻട്രൊഡ്യൂസ് ചെയ്യുന്നതിന് മുൻപ് നമ്മൾ ഈ ടോക്ക്, നമ്മൾക്കറിയാം ന്യൂ എഡ്യൂക്കേഷൻ പോളിസി യുടെ ഭാഗമായി അതിന്റെ ഇംപ്ലിമെന്റേഷൻ പല മേഖലയിലും നടന്നിട്ടുണ്ട്. അപ്പം ചരിത്രത്തിലും അതിന്റെ ഇംപ്ലിമെന്റേഷൻ ഓൾറെഡി അവർ സ്റ്റാർട്ട് ചെയ്തു. അതുപോലെ തന്നെ അതിന്റെ ഭാഗമായി നമുക്കറിയാം ചരിത്രം എന്ന് പറയുന്നത് മറ്റെല്ലാ ശാസ്ത്രശാഖകൾ പോലെ തന്നെയും അതൊരു വളർന്നുകൊണ്ടേയിരിക്കുന്ന, അല്ലെങ്കിൽ അതൊരു ഒരു സിസ്റ്റമാറ്റിക് ഇന്റർപ്രിട്ടേഷൻ അബൌട്ട് പാസ്റ്റ് ആണ്. വളരെ സിസ്റ്റമാറ്റിക് ആയിട്ട് സയന്റിഫിക്കലി ആണ് നമ്മൾ പാസ്റ്റിനെ പറ്റി ചരിത്രത്തിലും പഠിക്കുന്നത്. അപ്പം അതൊരു കാലഘട്ടത്തിൽ നമ്മളെ നാട്ടിൽ ചരിത്രം എന്ന് അറിയപ്പെട്ടിരുന്നത് മിത്തുകളെയും പുരാണമായിട്ടുള്ള ഇതിഹാസങ്ങളൊക്കെ ആയിരുന്നു. അപ്പൊ അതിൽ നിന്ന് സമൂഹത്തിന്റെ വികാസത്തിന്റെ ഭാഗമായി പുതിയ സാമൂഹ്യ ശാസ്ത്രങ്ങൾ ഉയർന്നു വന്നു. ലൈക്ക് ആന്ത്രപ്പോളജി, എക്കണോമിക്സ്, സോഷ്യോളജി, ഇതുപോലെ തന്നെ ചരിത്രവും വികാസപ്പെട്ടു വന്നു. അപ്പം ഈ സമൂഹ ശാസ്ത്രങ്ങൾ ഉണ്ടായിരുന്ന വികാസം ചരിത്രത്തിലുണ്ടായ വികാസം ഈ ശാസ്ത്രങ്ങളെ എല്ലാം അങ്ങോട്ട് സ്വാധീനിച്ചിട്ടുണ്ട്. അപ്പം നമ്മൾ ഇന്ന് കാണുന്ന ഈ ഒരു ചരിത്രത്തിന്റെ ഈ ഇന്നത്തെ മോഡേൺ ഹിസ്റ്ററിയിൽ രൂപത്തിലേക്ക് വരുന്നത് ഒരുപാട് വർഷങ്ങളുടെ പല ചരിത്രകാരന്മാരുടെയും കോൺട്രിബ്യൂഷന്റെ എല്ലാം ഭാഗമായിട്ടാണ്. ഇന്ന് നമ്മൾക്കറിയാം, ഇപ്പൊ ഇന്ത്യയുടെ തന്നെ എടുക്കുവാണെങ്കിൽ 1818 1818 മില്ലിന്റെ ചരിത്രം ആയിരുന്നു, ബ്രിട്ടീഷ് ഇന്ത്യൻ ഹിസ്റ്ററി ആയിരുന്നു ആദ്യത്തെ ഹിസ്റ്ററി. അത് കഴിഞ്ഞ് 200 വർഷത്തിന് ശേഷം ചരിത്രം ഡെവലപ്പ് ചെയ്തു. നമ്മൾക്ക് ഇന്നറിയാം ജനറ്റിക്സിന്റെ പഠനം ഹിസ്റ്ററിനെ സഹായിക്കുന്നുണ്ട്. ടോണി ജോസഫിന്റെ ഏർലി ഇന്ത്യൻ ഹിസ്റ്ററി, അതുപോലെ റൊമീല താപ്പർ, DN ഷാ, അങ്ങനെ ഒരുപാട് മഹാലക്ഷ്മി മാം പോലുള്ള ഒരുപാട് ആളുകളുടെ കോൺട്രിബ്യൂഷൻ ഇന്ന് ഹിസ്റ്ററിയിലുണ്ട്. പക്ഷെ ഇപ്പോ നമുക്ക് കാണാൻ സാധിക്കുന്നത് പുതിയ ചരിത്ര സിലബസുകളിലൂടെ നമ്മളുടെ സർക്കാർ അല്ലെങ്കിൽ അവര് ചരിത്രത്തെ വളച്ചൊടിക്കുക, ചരിത്രത്തെ റീറൈറ്റ് ചെയ്യുന്നു എന്നുള്ള പേരിൽ ചരിത്രത്തെ വളച്ചൊടിക്കുകയാണ് ചെയ്യുന്നത്. അപ്പം ഈ വിഷയത്തില് നമ്മൾക്കറിയാം, ഇപ്പം എല്ലാ കാലവും ഫാസിസ്റ്റുകൾ ഭയപ്പെട്ടിരുന്നത് ചരിത്രത്തെയാണ്. അതുകൊണ്ട് എന്നും അവര് അതിനെ വളച്ചൊടിക്കാനും അവരുടെ ആവശ്യങ്ങൾക്ക് വേണ്ടി അതിനെ ഉപയോഗിക്കാനും ശ്രമിച്ചുകൊണ്ടേയിരിക്കുന്നു. ആ ഒരു പ്രോസസ്സിന്റെ ഭാഗമായിട്ടാണ് നമ്മുടെ ചരിത്രത്തിലും ഇങ്ങനെയുള്ള ചരിത്രത്തിൽ ഇപ്പം പുതിയതായിട്ട് UGCയുടെ ഹിസ്റ്ററി സിലബസ് വരികയും അതുപോലെ വിനയ് P സഹസ്രയുടെ നേതൃത്വത്തിൽ അദ്ദേഹത്തെ വെച്ചുകൊണ്ടുള്ള ഒരു കമ്മിറ്റിയുടെ NCERT SCERT പുതിയ ചരിത്ര പുസ്തകങ്ങൾ സ്കൂൾ തലങ്ങളിൽ പുതിയ ചരിത്ര പുസ്തകങ്ങൾ വരികയും ചെയ്തു. അപ്പൊ ഈ പുസ്തകങ്ങൾ പരിശോധിക്കുകയാണെങ്കിൽ ചരിത്രത്തെ വളരെ മോണോലിത്തിക് ആയിട്ട്, മോണോലിത്തിക് എന്ന് പറയുമ്പോൾ ഓൺലി ഒരു സർട്ടൻ എന്താണെന്ന് പഠിക്കുന്നത്. ചരിത്രത്തിൽ ഇപ്പൊ സൗത്ത് ഇന്ത്യയുടെ ചരിത്രമില്ല, നോർത്ത് ഈസ്റ്റിന്റെ ചരിത്രമില്ല, അതുപോലെ ചരിത്രത്തിന്റെ പുതിയ വികാസങ്ങളൊന്നുമില്ല. 40 വർഷത്തെ റൊമീല താപ്പർ അവരിലെല്ലാം പുസ്തകങ്ങൾ ഒഴിവാക്കിക്കൊണ്ടാണ് ഇത് വന്നിരിക്കുന്നത്. അപ്പം 40 വർഷത്തെ ചരിത്രമേ ഒഴിവാക്കുക എന്ന് പറയുന്നത് ചരിത്രത്തിന്റെ ആ വികാസത്തെ പൂർണ്ണമായിട്ടും മാറ്റി നിർത്തിക്കൊണ്ടാണ്. അപ്പം ഇതിനെല്ലാം എതിരെയാണ് നമ്മൾ ഇന്ന് ഇവിടെ ഒരു സാഫ്രനൈസേഷൻ ഓഫ് ഹിസ്റ്ററി, അത് എന്താണെന്ന് മനസ്സിലാക്കാനും എന്താണ് അവര് എങ്ങനെയാണ് നമ്മളുടെ ഫാസിസ്റ്റ് ഗവൺമെന്റ് ചരിത്രത്തെ എങ്ങനെയാണ് അവർ ഡിസ്റ്റോർട്ട് ചെയ്യുന്നത് എന്ന വിഷയത്തിലാണ് ഇവിടെ ഡിസ്കഷൻ. Now I invite Professor Mahalakshmi ma'am. So welcome everyone for the webinar. Today we are discussing extremely relevant topic of the time, Saffronisation of History and in examination in the light of New Education Policy 2020. For discussing this topic, we have Professor Mahalakshmi ma'am. We all know her, like she's teaching, as I mentioned earlier, she's teaching ancient Indian history in Jawaharlal Nehru University, Delhi, and she is well known for her contributions to history. And also as I mentioned earlier, today's one of the major concern of BJP government is history, and because for that they are rewriting it, they are making changes to it. So in that process, we can actually see that they are not actually rewriting history; they are actually distorting history. And this is happening on the one side. On the other side, we have historians like Professor Mahalakshmi ma'am, and Rifan Habib, Romila Tapper. All these professors are they're actually dedicating their whole life to writing, to seminars, to discussions. Uh, they are standing against all these kind of distortions of history, all these kind of activities. So I'm so glad that she is with us, and she will deliver us, like she'll tell us how this saffronization of history is happening. And I invite Professor Mahalakshmi ma'am to deliver her speech.
Thank you so much, Anjali. I would like to thank the organizers for inviting me to speak today on a topic that's of very serious concern to all professional historians: the distortion of history, as very rightly pointed out by Anjali, that has been happening over the past couple of years insidiously, but it has become a very, very blatant process at the moment. And we see that there are certain institutional mechanisms that are being used to legitimize this kind of distorted history. So, the distortion of history is essentially one that we are defining here as resting on a right wing communal agenda. And it is in that context that I will talk today. Now, the primary objection that may be raised to such distortions is that these violate the basic tenets of scientific historical research, as has been established not just in India, world over. There are certain ways in which we engage in historical research, and these we would deem as resting on certain scientific principles. What is this? One, it is to examine all the available sources at a given point of time, that is, at a historical context. So, in a given historical context, whatever sources that are available to us, to examine them closely. The second important tenet is that we critically interpret the sources on the basis of their content as well as the context that they reveal. In other words, sources don't speak by themselves. The facts don't exist by themselves, and it is for the historian to interpret the facts, but this interpretation has to be done critically and on the basis of a corroboration through the study of different kinds of sources that are available for a particular period of time. So, these are the basic tenets that we more or less accept world over, and this is what historians in India also would see as the founding principle as far as historical research is concerned. And so, the foundation, therefore, for any historical scholarship, whether in India or outside, is that we look carefully at the sources and that we also try to analyze and interpret them and situate them within particular contexts. And it is these principles that are being completely thrown out of the window. There is complete disregard by these right wing forces that seek to distort our knowledge and understanding of the past. And that is why, as historians, as Indians, as citizens, we need to be concerned, because when you distort your history, when you distort your understanding of the past, then you are also distorting your understanding of the present, of who we are. Hmm? Now, there are several ways in which this distortion has been attempted. And today I'm going to actually be talking about different kinds of distortions that we can see around us, that find a place in the public sphere. And so what do we see? We find that in the public domain, we have a multi-pronged attack. And this multi-pronged attack is coming on the part of both state and private players on existing historical knowledge and methods. So the attack is the existing state of knowledge as far as the discipline of history is concerned. And it is also very crucially attacking the established historical methodology that we follow. This attack is not random, neither is it accidental in terms of timing. And that is why we need to look at our own context, a context in which we have a government which is repeatedly presenting a certain narrative about our identity as a Hindu one. And therefore, what it is doing is it is endorsing these kinds of attacks in different ways. So first, what I will do is I will talk about the way in which the state is visible to us as engaging in this kind of delegitimizing and even attacking of the state of historical knowledge as it exists, with a view to presenting a distorted history as a revisionist history. So the idea of revisionism is one where we are talking of using new material, new evidence, new interpretive frameworks through which we are presenting a different interpretation. So they are claiming that they are giving a revisionist history, but they are not actually doing that. What they are doing is actually completely distorting history. And so let's start with the National Education Policy 2020, a very, very important document that raises a red flag about sweeping changes that are proposed in the field of education. I do not have the expertise to speak on the issue of educational policy in general, as it has developed over the decades in post-independence India. And there are experts who are writing, will be writing, who are speaking on this issue. So I will not go into the details of it, except to remark on certain points made in the NEP document that pertain to history. Now, point 7 of the introduction states, the rich heritage of ancient Indian knowledge has been a guiding light for this policy. The aim of education in ancient India was not just the acquisition of knowledge as preparation for life in this world or life beyond schooling, but for complete realization and liberation of the self. World-class institutions of ancient India, such as Takshashila, Nalanda, Vikramshila, and Vallabhi, set the highest standards of multidisciplinary teaching and research and hosted scholars and students from across backgrounds and countries. The Indian education system produced scholars like Charaka and Sushruta, Aryabhatta, Bhaskaracharya, Chanakya, Madhava, Patanjali, Panini, and Tiruvalluvar, among numerous others. They made seminal contributions to world knowledge in diverse fields such as mathematics, astronomy, metallurgy, medical science and surgery, civil engineering and architecture, shipbuilding and navigation, etc., etc. These rich legacies to world heritage must not only be nurtured and preserved for posterity, but also researched, enhanced, and put to new uses through our education system. Unquote. And then, under the heading principles of this policy, that is, principles of the NEP, various laudable principles such as flexibility, interdisciplinarity, inclusivity, etc., are mentioned. Of course, when they are scrutinized, you will find that there is much to critique over there as well. But under this, you have a particular reference to Indian history and ancient Indian culture. I quote, a rootedness and pride in India and its rich, diverse, ancient, and modern culture and knowledge systems and traditions, and its forward looking aspirations to be incorporated where relevant in an accurate manner and form an anchor and source of inspiration for all education. Hmm? So, what you can see very clearly is that there is a harking to the ancient knowledge systems, and about the way in which this can provide pride and rootedness. So, this is one of the core principles that is mentioned in the NEP. In the section on equitable and inclusive education, learning for all, you have various recommendations that are made, again, very laudable, such as providing hostels, taking measures to overcome biases related to gender, caste, and class, etc. Now, in this section, we also have reference to development of a culture. And in this regard, the report states, the policy report states, I quote, children shall learn the basic philosophy of ancient Indian civilization and the inherent acceptance of diversity. Okay, unquote. Now, it is obvious from all these, little statements that I have quoted from the NEP that the emphasis in the document where history is a reference point, where history is mentioned at all, is ancient history in terms of developments in knowledge systems like Ayurveda, astronomy, mathematics, or philosophy. And there's only one place where modern Indian culture and knowledge are lauded side by side with the ancient. It would be striking for anyone who looks at this to see the absence of the medieval period and the achievements in knowledge acquisition, in the pursuit of knowledge, in the creation of institutions, in the development of a culture. All of these, which are so so well marked in the medieval period, all of these are left out. They are not part of what we see as sources from which we can gain pride, and that pride which we can then instill in children through a curriculum, through school education or education at any other level. So what is very, very clear is that the emphasis is on ancient history, and that where history is being referred to, and that it is on the achievements, the glories of the past, that the idea of drawing upon history is proposed in the NEP. I'll move to another document, which many of you will be familiar with, the UGC's draft syllabus. Now, the UGC came out with this draft syllabus for history under the head of Learning Outcomes Based Curriculum Framework, LOCF. And justifying the need for the new syllabus, we are told in the preamble, I quote, historical facts are not static, since new discoveries are constantly thrown up by archaeology, generics. I'm quoting, that's how it's written in the document, climate sciences, and so on. As with all of knowledge, existing hypotheses need to be tested. This interaction should be the center of discussion in a proactive classroom, which in turn can produce a researcher with an inquisitive and scientific temperament. As of late, quoting authority is seen as more important than primary material. The disdain for facts, in turn, has discouraged the systematic collation of primary evidence. Quite apart from removing major distortions, it, meaning this report, I presume, this draft syllabus, will have two important benefits. First, it will make history more about exploration and discovery than about memorizing a static narrative. Second, it will give Indians a feeling of ownership over their own history with a broader worldview. Unquote. Further, in this document, in the introduction, we are told, despite the incessant efforts of a historian, it is impossible for him to capture everything about his choice of study. Availability of evidence, its reliability and consistency, available time, and the objectives of the study shape his selection and utilization of sources and evidence. This may be a defining line for a historian, but cannot be a defining line for history of a nation, specifically like ours, which needs to be presented in totality rather than in any centric form. It must be an organized critical study of such past activities of human beings as had produced significant effects on subsequent course of events in each part of the nation. Indeed, the main difficulty facing the historian and the history as a whole is not eliminating unanswerable or unimportant questions, but choosing the important ones. A historian's choice of study is determined by personal values, concerns of those who support his work, the nature of the age in which he lives, or by a combination of the aforesaid. Significantly, the ways in which these influences operate are complex, and the historian himself is often unaware of them. Present curriculum guideline is an endeavor in this direction, as it focuses on introducing nation's history on wider perspective at graduate level through core papers rather than comprehending the vast regions as ephemeral notions. Unquote. Now, of course, the most perplexing thing in this paragraph, in this statement, is the fact that it claims, there is a claim made that individuals cannot write an objective history, that we have to write the history of a nation. Who's going to write that history of the nation? The nation's going to come forward by itself to write it. So obviously, the clear problems in the way in which things have been formulated in this introduction, and there is an attempt to seek some kind of justification for it, but clearly it falls flat. So we are told that that historians are fallible, that they are located in a particular context, and that context then impinges on the kinds of questions the historian asks, and that this might then undermine what is required for a nation's history. And we need to move towards that nation's history. How are we going to move towards that nation's history? We'll go on to talk about it in a little while. Now, so let us flag some of the issues that have been raised in the introductory statements of the UGC history syllabus. The first pertains to the historian's craft, something that we've already discussed. And the second relates to the state of the discipline, meaning what kind of historical scholarship exists at the present time. And clearly there is according to the report, according to the draft syllabus, there has to be an indictment of the kind of historical scholarship that exists at this point of time. So they see that the state of the discipline is really in shambles, and that through this syllabus, this new syllabus, they are going to resurrect the discipline itself. And let's see how they're doing it. So what are they doing in terms of talking about how bad the state of the discipline is? They're saying that the existing history and historiography is static. It is ossified. There is no concern for new evidence or interpretation. And then, of course, I've already mentioned this, that it's not possible, of course, for a historian to capture everything. That's the word that is used in the document. You cannot capture everything. So, it's like you are hunting for something and you're going after something and you're unable to capture it. That is how the historian is portrayed over here. The idea of a centric history is talked about, and it is posited against a total history. And existing scholarship, apparently, this document tells us, is focused on a centric history. Now, what does this mean? I have no way of knowing, because I do not have the brilliance of the people who came up with this document. And so we will leave it to them to explain this to us further. But it's certainly interesting to see that there is something called a centric history and there's something called a total history, and that the existing scholarship is actually talking about a centric history. Then you have the statement that goes on to talk about choosing important questions to be addressed. That is very necessary at the current stage of at the current point of time. That is, that we then will be able to get out of this centric history again. Going back to that point, we'll be able to get out of that centric history and move towards this total history if we choose certain important questions that need to be addressed. And what are those questions? Those questions relate to presenting a wider history of the nation. Hmm? And this wider history of the nation is one which looks at the national identity, looks at pride in the nation, inculcating pride in the nation. That's very interesting that in the same statement there is this reference to regions and regional history. That the region is some kind of an ephemeral notion, we are told. Ephemeral, it's transient, it is not something that is really tangible. And it is not something that is permanent, that we can actually latch on to. So the region as a concept is an ephemeral notion. Nation and the nation's history is something that is very much there and that we need to pursue, and we need to move towards that kind of an understanding that possibly in this document is understood as a total history. Now the language, when we actually look at this document, something that is very disappointing, and also one which raises concerns about who actually drafted this document, relates to the way in which the language and ideas are communicated. It's an extremely casual style that is employed, and you will find numerous typographical errors on every page of the document. Yeah. Now let me just give you the last part of the introduction to, as an example of this kind of casualness. Okay. I quote, "As per changing times, the other core papers have also been remodeled with introduction of a newspaper." I think they meant to say new paper or new papers. Like Cultural Heritage of India and History of Communication and Media, with a view to develop skill at undergraduate level as per spirit and design of LOCF guidelines. A serious remodeling of medieval period has been done that covers larger portions of India for a better understanding of nation history. I'm still quoting. A historian is essentially trained to be objective in his selection, analysis, and interpretation of evidence. The curriculum is an attempt to A. Customize the student to larger levels of Indian, Asian, and world history, which can broaden the arena of young minds and also bring a mark shift in the pedagogy. Unquote. Now, it's okay in the introduction, and one needn't dwell too much on on grammatical mistakes. But when we actually look at the draft courses, we find that there are major blunders that can be seen over there. And to my mind, this reflects more than just carelessness. There is a shocking, and what I would say is a preposterous academic gap that is revealed. So, whoever was engaged in the making of this syllabus, I would seriously question their academic credentials, because this is not something that a serious academic, and I would presume it's an academic committee rather than individuals, that a serious academic committee would allow to be placed in the public domain. Now, I'm not going to go into too many details of the courses that have been presented in the UGC's BA History draft syllabus. What I will do is I'll focus on only two core courses, that too very briefly, just to give you an idea of the kinds of distortions, as well as complete carelessness that is there in the way the courses have been conceptualized. Now, the first course that I will talk about is it belongs to this basket called core courses. And in the basket, you have the first, which is titled The Idea of Bharat. Okay. And at the beginning of that course, there is a learning outcome that is mentioned. What is this learning outcome? I quote, students will acquire knowledge regarding the primitive life and cultural status of the people of ancient India. They can gather knowledge about the society, culture, religion, and political history of ancient India. They will also acquire the knowledge of changing socio-cultural scenarios of India. Unquote. Now, I mean, I was just very perplexed the first time I saw this, because I was just wondering, why are they even having this kind of a course? Because the other course that I will just briefly mention to you within this basket of core courses is actually focusing on ancient India from prehistoric times to the mid first millennium BC. So, what is the point of having a course titled Idea of Bharat as a flagship course, as the first course that is to be offered to students of history at the BA level? Here, clearly, what is happening is that, initially when I looked at this, I thought that by using the term Bharat, they were just substituting India with the name Bharat, because that's how we use it generally. In general usage in all Indian languages, we refer to India as Bharat. But what you can see is that there is a clear orientation in the course towards only ancient India. The focus is on ancient history per se, ancient Indian history per se. Now, there are 5 units. Suppose we were to just even, look through this and see, is there something that we can even take seriously in this particular course that is proposed? There are 5 units that are specified. The first relates to concept of Bharatavarsha. And then you have Indian knowledge, tradition, art, and culture as the second unit. The third unit is about dharma, philosophy, and Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam. The fourth one is about science, environment, and medical science. And the fifth one is about Indian economic traditions. Right? Now, what we find is that when we go through the sub-themes that are mentioned within each unit, they are very, very clumsy in the way in which they have been conceptualized, and also the way in which the themes have been arranged and specified is also something that is beyond one's understanding. Now, suppose we look at that first unit, which is about the concept of Bharatvarsha. Now, in this, the first sub-theme is about eternity of synonyms, Bharat. That's why I said casualness and clear lack of academic rigor that is visible here. Eternity of synonyms, Bharat. What does this mean? Does it even make sense to talk about something like this as historians? Are we really, promoting these kinds of ridiculous ideas about something that is eternal when we are looking at a historical concept? So anyway, this is very ridiculous. And the second sub theme that you find mentioned is Indian concept of time and space. Now, what is the connection? You have the broad unit, which is called concept of Bharatavarsha. Within that, you have the first theme, which is given as eternity of synonyms Bharat. And the second the second theme is Indian concept of time and space. What does this mean? Any serious historian of ancient India would know that the manner in which the term Bharat and Bharatavarsha are used in early Indian sources are specific. They relate to a tribe, they relate to a region that is ruled over by a tribe, and gradually the term Bharatavarsha is used to refer to a certain geographical entity. And even then, that geographical entity does not correspond to what we understand as the Indian subcontinent per se. And it certainly is, with certain specific kind of religious idea of a sacred geography, that this idea of the Bharatavarsha is also propounded. B.D. Chattopadhyay, in a very brilliant article on the concept of Bharatavarsha, discusses this in very, very great detail. But it's no surprise to us, of course, that B.D. Chattopadhyay's work on Bharatavarsha is not part of the reading list. It's not at all a surprise when we actually look at it. Several other scholars have talked about the idea of India, because I thought that this course was going to be about the idea of India. Whether you look at the presidential address of D.N. Jha in the Indian History Congress, whether you look at the presidential address of Shireen Musvi, and of course, even this particular essay of B.D. Chattopadhyay that I was talking about is his presidential address, General President's address at the Indian History Congress. So you have several scholars who have reflected on the idea of India, and who have understood that the idea of India cannot be understood in a simplistic way as corresponding to modern India, to the modern nation state, or to the Indian subcontinent as a whole. That is the idea of India in the modern sense. It is a modern a modern development. It is something that develops in modern times, although there are elements of this idea of some kind of a geographical unity even in pre-modern times. So all of these scholars have talked about it very rigorously, surveying and analyzing various sources that are there for early Indian history and for medieval Indian history. So it's very surprising that you have something like this that can actually be passed off as a course. Now let's within this course, let's look at the other units. In the second unit, you have a sub theme which is on ethics of Indian valor. I mean, what is that second unit? The second unit is supposed to be on Indian knowledge, tradition, art, and culture. And can you believe it? There is actually a separate sub theme, which is seen as being very important to present before young students at the BA level in a history honors course, which is ethics of Indian valor. So the idea of a valorous ancient Indian is something that is sought to be presented over here. And there are reasons why this kind of an idea has been presented even earlier by ideologues of the RSS. The issue of the medieval period as one being where Muslim conquerors came and conquered the entire subcontinent. The issue of Indian men, therefore, not being able to stand up, or Indians not being able to stand up to the military might of these Muslim rulers. The need to talk about, rejuvenating the psyche and the people in such a way that they would internalize this idea of valor. This is something that ideologues have talked about, and many scholars have referred to this. But what is very, very interesting, that under a theme like Indian knowledge, tradition, art, and culture, you have a sub-theme like ethics of Indian valor, and we have no idea. There is no description of what would be the basis for discussion in this sub-theme. Now, in the third unit refers to Indian perception of dharma and darshan as one of the sub-themes. And in the fourth unit, we have science and technology in ancient India. So there's no ambiguity at all. There is no, confusion at all. In this course, Bharat and the idea of Bharat refers to ancient India. And the assumption, it seems, is that modern Bharat is predicated on the achievements and glories of the ancient Bharat. So it's absolutely, something that cannot be even discussed seriously, just because of the complete lack of academic rigor that one can see here. Now, this shoddiness that we see in the way in which the course is conceptualized continues in the bibliography, where if we keep aside the referencing style, there's a certain style in which bibliographies are made, for instance, and it is on the basis of the surnames, that the authors' names and then the titles are mentioned, and then they're arranged alphabetically. So, at the top of the list will be a surname which starts with A, and then we'll go downwards. So in the list, we have scholars like A.L. Basham and A.S. Altekar. But no surprises. A.L. Basham is first and A.S. Altekar follows him. It's an absolute, throwing out of the window all the established traditions in relation with regard to scholarship. Then another kind of shoddiness that we see is in the way in which, even where the dates of publication of works have been mentioned, and there are several which don't have dates of publication, we find that there is a mistake in the date of publication. So what we find is that a book that is written in 1914 but was probably republished at a later point of time, once the copyright part had dropped, so maybe someone else had published it, so you had a date, say, in the 1990s. You have that date of the 1990s being given. And the other thing is, of course, where you find the shoddiness reflected in just the spellings of the authors' names, where even a stalwart, a great scholar like Radha Kumud Mukherjee, that wonderful work of his, which is The Fundamental Unity of India, is a very good work. But of course, there is a lot that has happened even after he has written. There have been some critical works that have talked of the errors, or the oversights that are there in this particular work. Nevertheless, still an important work. Even someone like that, whose work has been cited more than once, whose reference has been given more than once, you find that his name is wrongly spelled. Yeah, and the title of his work also in one case is wrongly given. So it's a very very hastily put together course, one which completely lacks academic rigor, and to my mind clearly does not reflect um, any kind of rootedness in the established historiography and historical methodology that most historians um, accept and practice. So this is one of the very very important things that we see when we look at this particular course, which is part of the draft syllabus that had been circulated by the UGC. Another paper that I'll just briefly mention is this course, which is referred to, it's paper 3, as History of India from Earliest Times to 550 CE. Now, again, you'll find the same casualness with regard to presentation. I'm not going to go into that part, but I think that two very important things are happening in this particular course. And this is the claims that have been made in the public domain for the need for a so-called revisionist history. You find that it is set over here. So what do I mean when I talk of this? As I've already mentioned, that even though the claim is of a revisionist history, to my mind and to all those who are trained as professional historians, this is what we would call a distorted historical presentation. Anyway, coming to the course itself, where is it that we find this particular issue? In the first unit, after discussing various prehistoric cultures, so because this is from earliest times, this history of India, you find that after discussing the prehistoric cultures, there's a sub-theme on the Indus Saraswati civilization. And um, the and then within that it says the Indus Saraswati civilization, and within that it says debate on the relationship of Indus Saraswati civilization and Vedic civilization. Okay, so very very clever way of bringing this particular issue in over here, and without actually going into any details. There is no statement about what this is going to be about, and so on. But so this is an issue that is clearly of great importance for those who are distorting history, and therefore it is brought into this unit. The second unit is titled Aryan Civilization. So that is the broad title of the second unit, and within it there are sub themes, and amongst the sub themes you have one which is original home of Aryans, myths of Aryan invasion, various theories. Right. So the second bugbear for those who are seeking to distort history and historical scholarship on ancient India is related to the so-called Aryans, and it resurrects a theory which had long ago been thrown out by scholars, which is the myth of the Aryan invasion. It brings it back as if scholars today are talking about Aryan invasion. Right? So look at the many things that are happening in the way in which these themes are constructed. And of course, this idea of the original home, were they from outside India or were they indigenous? And clearly, the first thing that I raised related to the Indus Saraswati civilization and the debate on the relationship between that and the Vedic civilization is tied to this theme, which is on the original home of the Aryans. Clearly, it is a distortion that is being attempted through such themes that are placed within the course. Now, when we actually look at the reading lists, you have, of course, luminaries, who have paved the way for distorted histories, who find mention there. But it's quite surprising, and I'm afraid that this may not be anything but further evidence of the shoddiness of those who put this syllabus together, which is that the works of Upinder Singh and Romila Thapar on the general histories of ancient and early medieval India, that these are included in the reading list. So very, very interesting to see how there is a claim that we need to revise history as it has been known and circulated, and there are instead what we find is that there is a complete distortion that is being attempted, and insidiously these ideas which feed into this distorted understanding of the past, which relate to the Indus civilization, which relate to the Vedic tradition and the Indo-Aryan language culture as it develops in from the middle of the first millennium, from the middle of the second millennium BC. These are things that we find that are very, very neatly being blended to present what seems to be an understanding of ancient India and a revised understanding of the past. Now, let's just briefly come to the issue of the Indus civilization. Now, those who wish to present a Hindu majoritarian view of the past, they want to anchor every aspect of identity, of knowledge, of civilizational attainment to the Vedic tradition. And this Vedic tradition was associated with the Indo-Aryan language culture. So when we see this harping on the Indus Saraswati civilization, adding the Saraswati to the name for that civilization, with no basis for that kind of a claim, that reveals an anxiety to enunciate India's past in terms of its Vedic roots and its Aryan legacy. So this is something that is very clearly there um, in this document that had been prepared by the UGC. In fact, actually, even to look at this document, to critique it, seems to be such a waste of time just because of the sheer lack of academic investment that those who put this document together reveal. And this is something that is really actually something that saddens me when I look at these kinds of documents. Now, the third major document that I will just briefly talk about, which again suggests the state's role, or foregrounds the state's role in pushing for a so-called revisionist history, is the report that was published by the Parliamentary Standing Committee on Education. This was titled A Draft Report on Reforms in Content and Design of School Textbooks. Now, in this report, when you actually read it, it says at the outset that the NEP 2020, and that's why the NEP remains the important document that we need to go back to and look very critically at. So, in this draft report of the Parliamentary Standing Committee on Education, we are told that the NEP 2020 and the National Curriculum Framework that was in the process of being revised had resulted in this exercise being undertaken by the Joint Parliamentary Committee. Right? So it is from the NEP 2020 and its recommendations that this kind of an exercise was undertaken. And then right at the beginning, it says that the focus, therefore, in the report and in the work of the committee that was working on this report was on A, removing references to unhistorical facts and distortions about our national heroes from the textbooks. B, ensuring equal or proportionate references to all periods of Indian history. And C, highlighting the role of great historic women achievers, including Gargi, Maitreyi, or rulers like Rani of Jhansi, Rani Channamma, Chand Bibi, Zalkari Bai, etc. Unquote. Now, when we actually look at the report and see, the various documents and the basis on which on the basis of these documents, the committee came to its conclusion. We find that there are depositions of members of 12 governmental and non-governmental institutional bodies that were considered while making the report. Amongst the governmental bodies, we have reference to the NCRT, the CBSE. They were represented by their respective heads. Then we have a reference to the SCERT Pune and to the Maharashtra State Bureau of Textbook Production and Curriculum Research, Pune. Now, this is something that we need to pause and consider, that there are these two organizations. One is SCRT Pune and the other is Maharashtra State Bureau of Textbook Production and Curriculum Research, which is clearly bringing out the state textbooks. Not merely are these two organizations being consulted, there are actually visits to these two organizations in Pune by the members of the Parliamentary Standing Committee. One can't really object to this. Of course, one should go and see the kind of work that is happening in different parts of the country. But why is it that no other state textbook departments or the Delhi SCRT was consulted? This is, after all, quite a perplexing thing. Why is it that only these two organizations were consulted? Now, just to give you an example, in Tamil Nadu, just about 4 years ago, an extensive rehauling of the school history curriculum was undertaken. And this is the state board. And a team of scholars engaged in primary research in the region and outside it were commissioned to write textbooks, keeping in view the established understanding as well as the new range of sources that had recently come to light, especially from the Tamil region itself. In fact, what is quite remarkable is that you have revised editions that were brought out within the next 2 years, taking cognizance of the comments of scholars as well as the splendid new archaeological record that is being revealed to us in the region. So you have other boards also that are there, that are doing wonderful work, that are trying to look carefully at school syllabus and so on. But interesting, they were not consulted. Anyway, going back to the non-state organizations, the non-governmental organizations, which were consulted. Now, there were 7 or 8 such organizations that were consulted. And of these, it's very interesting that 5 at least, or maybe 6, are associated clearly with the RSS and its affiliates. Let me just give you the names of those. One is the Bharatiya Shikshan Mandal, and this is a subsidiary organization of the RSS established in 1969. The second is the Siksha Sanskriti Uthanyas, and this was established by Dinanath Batra, a former Pracharak of Rashtriya Swayam Sevak Sangh and former director of Vidya Bharati. This was established in 2007. A third is called Jnana Prabodhini, and the late Shri V.V. alias Appa Pendse founded this particular organization. Again, there is an RSS link that we find over here. Then we find Vidya Bharati Akhil Bharatiya Shiksha Sansthan, which was founded in 1952, and it is closely and it is this is the organization that runs the Saraswati Shishu Mandir. So obviously, the RSS association is very visible to us. And then you have this particular organization called Public Policy Research Institute, which is headed currently by a person called Dr. Sumit Bhasin. And he is, I do not know if my recollection is correct, he's possibly associated with the IIT, but clearly he's also a member of the BJP IT cell. So again, direct association with the RSS BJP. And then there's another called the Samvit Research Foundation, which seems to have a right-wing affiliation. So just, actually the point I'm making is that the depositions that were given by these organizations were considered sufficiently important for them to be mentioned, and a fair amount of detailed discussion on what was conveyed by these organizations is available in the parliamentary committee report. Now, then there are 4 individuals also who deposed before the parliamentary standing committee. Now, when we actually look at the names of the people in this, these 4 individuals, you will find that none of them actually are professional historians. You have people like Dr. J.S. Rajput, who during the previous NDA regime, he headed the NCRT, various other people like this who are there, who seem to have had other professional qualifications and an interest in history, of course. One can always be interested in history even if one is not trained in history. But they are the individuals who come before this committee to present their ideas and views about history without training in the methodology of history, without a knowledge of the historian's craft. That is the problem that we have over here. In fact, there is only one representation from professional historians, and that was from the Indian History Congress. This, as almost all of you will know, is the premier body of professional historians. It was established in the colonial context in 1935, precisely to present a scientific understanding of India's past, to also contest the state's interpretation. At that point, the colonial state's interpretation of Indian history. This organization did make a representation, and although it is not mentioned in a table, in a very fancy table that is given in the report, you do have the comments of the Indian History Congress that is discussed in the report. So we sent a very large, and because of my own association with the Indian History Congress as the secretary, I was very much involved in the writing of this long and detailed report, where we issued a public statement also with regard to this, and we sent that public statement along with that report. That report was actually a fact sheet which refuted all these allegations of historical distortion that had been made right at the beginning of the report of the Parliamentary Standing Committee. Now, all these documents are in the public domain on the IHC website and on other websites. And a mere glimpse at the IHC response will reveal the detailed response that was provided by the organization, refuting the allegations that have been made against the existing textbooks, as well as the textbooks that were removed by the NDA regime when they were in power earlier. And all of these textbooks whether the earlier ones that were authored by Bipin Chandra, R.S. Sharma, Satish Chandra, Romila Thapar, or the newer ones where you had teams of eminent scholars like Kumkum Roy, Niladri Bhattacharya, and so on, who were involved in this. So, eminent scholars who, through their own research, were able to put together very readable books for school children. So we refuted this very, very clearly, and I'm not going to go into that because it's very much available in the public domain. But I think that what we need to also consider is that while there is an institutional, um, you know, um, process that is underway to distort history and to present the distorted history as a revisionist history, as an alternate history, and to delegitimize the kind of historical scholarship that exists today. We also need to look at the way in which this idea of a distorted history, this idea of the existing scholarship as being flawed and as being skewed is something that has also been fostered by some of these private groups that I had mentioned, who also participated in the Parliamentary Standing Committee's deliberations, like the Public Policy Research Center. Now, their report, titled Distortion and Misrepresentation of India's Past, History Textbooks and Why They Need to Change. This is a report, and possibly they submitted it around mid 2021. And this clearly had a huge bearing on the final report that came out from the Parliamentary Standing Committee, because you'll find very similar kind of language and framing that is there in some of the recommendations. Now, anyway, coming to this particular report, we need to look at it closely. What is very interestingly is that it provides a very detailed critique of the existing NCERT textbooks. But what we also find is that there's an inclusion of a comparative analysis of the Kerala and the Gujarat state textbooks. Now, when you look at the preface of this document, and that's why I think that one needs to look at these and how a new language is being employed to discredit the kind of historical scholarship that we have in the country, that is recognized by the professionals, and also which is recognized outside India. That how cleverly a new language is being employed to discredit that kind of scholarship. So in the preface of the document, we find this statement. I quote, "In the post-independence period, education and intellectual inquiry came to be dominated by a specific group which can be characterized as the left liberal lobby. The first Prime Minister of India was responsible for outsourcing the entire educational framework to this lobby, which gladly forwarded a left-centric agenda. The dominance of this lobby in all spheres of academics, particularly in social science, set a dangerous precedent, thereby advocating fallacious theories for pummeling the truth." Unquote. So, while I was talking about the UGC document as being absolutely shoddy in terms of its presentation, what we find is a very well brought out document. So much so, I must narrate this incident where I had circulated this to a group of friends, and one of them actually said that, "Oh, this is so well brought out. And it seems to be very solid," without actually going into the implications of what is being said in this document. So that's the kind of danger that we face right now, that even those who are aware of the political agenda, the kind of distortions that are taking place, and so on, even some amongst us might actually get carried away because of the kind of presentation that such documents have. So what we find is that there are 10 chapters in this work, and different things related to the existing scholarship, the ideology, etc. But there are three substantive chapters, the seventh, eighth, and the ninth, which argue against the existing school textbooks published by the NCRT, and claims to break up the information in such a way that it can be tabulated, and the number of references to certain kinds of terms, for instance, that is presented over there, nice graphs that are there, lovely tables that are created, and so on. Now, in this work, there are three topics that are taken up for criticism related to ancient history, just to show you, how ridiculous in terms of content even this particular document is. But just because of its presentation, it gets passed off as something that seems a little more rigorous. Anyway, so the three topics that are taken up for criticism related to ancient history. Now, what are these three topics? They are caste, they are slavery, and gender. And we are told that the NCRT history textbooks, they excessively portray caste hierarchies that are prevalent in Indian society, and says that there are so many references to caste and the terms that are associated with it in the textbooks. But there is a criticism against the Kerala State Education Board, because they apparently are only referring to the later periods of Indian history, and there is no reference to the Vedic period in the Kerala school textbook. In fact, this is a complaint that continues in the report. The Kerala school textbooks have not given importance to the most important period in our history, which is the Vedic period. Anyway, so there is this kind of a description and discussion that is there, and I'm not going to quote. There is it's available in the public domain, and people can look it up. But what is very interesting is that it says we should not use, I mean, there's too much of the use of the term varna and jati, and this seems to suggest that there's a very highly hierarchical social order, that the brahmanas were the ones who set up this order, and that there is also reference to untouchability. This is absolutely unwarranted, and it says that there is this accusatory tone that is being used against the brahmanas. Now, how you can glean an accusatory tone from a very dry written text which is talking about the varna jati structure as it existed in ancient India? One is quite clueless. But these authors, or the authors of this report, clearly are hearing this accusatory tone because the brahmanas are being presented apparently as villains, and Indian society is being presented as backward and, I mean, it's their language, retrogressive. Yeah, what does it mean? From some a higher state, it's going down, so there is that kind of regression that is there. This is the major objection as far as caste is concerned. What does it mean that we don't refer to caste? That caste as a structure of social organization, caste as a mechanism to control and exploit the labor of a significant section of the population, who are then through some kind of a creation of a ritual order, are relegated to the bottom of that social hierarchy. You have all kinds of restrictions on people who are at the bottom of the social ladder. There are all kinds of injunctions and prescriptions that are laid out. So, what this report is suggesting is quite preposterous for us as historians to even imagine, that a mode of organizing of society, a mechanism to organize society, which is very specific to the Indian context, which is the Varna Jati system, that we are not to talk about this. Because what it does is it presents Indian society as backward and retrogressive. On slavery, the objection is to the references to Dasa and Dasyu in the Vedic context. And it then goes on to say ridiculous things like, but in the medieval period, there are only 12 references to slave, whereas there should have been more references to slave. Anyway, this fits in with the kind of mindset that is revealed in the document. And the third issue that is flagged relates to gender, where it says that the NCRT textbooks have depicted women in the ancient period as subjugated beings who had no rights whatsoever. According to these textbooks, women were not allowed to educate themselves. They did not have any say in the decision-making process within the household, and they were subject to the command of the menfolk. So apparently the textbooks are saying this. Now, in the Indian History Congress's report that we submitted to the Parliamentary Standing Committee, we took this issue up and have shown through a tabulating of the content in the textbooks, in the NCRT textbooks, that this is an absolute lie. That there are so many references to women as important figures in a particular historical context, who have played a role in society, who are depicted in different ways. And it is absolutely incorrect to say that there is no reference to women at all as having any agency in the textbooks. The second thing is that why should there be an objection to talking about structural inequalities in society? There are enough sources that tell us from ancient India, from the Vedic corpus, that tell us that there were certain kinds of limitations that were imposed on women and women's mobility and their access to resources. There were also, of course, ways of subverting those restrictions and limitations that are also available to us. But it is largely the prescriptive traditions which suggest that this is a patriarchal society that expected that women were under the control and protection of men. And I'm not going to go into details on this, but scholars like Uma Chakravarti and Kumkum Roy have written extensively on these issues. Even before that, R.S. Sharma, in one of his essays in the collection on ancient Indian society and economy, there he has talked about gender, about the issue of women and the way in which they are represented in the text, and what does it mean in terms of understanding their place in society. Right, so it's very strange that the people who have come out with this report, the PPRC, is seeking to write away this aspect of ancient Indian history. So obviously, this is not coming from any concern as a historian, but it is coming from certain other kinds of concerns. Now, many other documents have been in circulation via WhatsApp University, Facebook posts, and so on. But I will rest my case with regard to the distortion of history about the deliberate attempts that have been made in recent times by sectarian section, by a section that has sought to undermine history and the historian's craft by lies and
I'm sorry to
misinformation.
interrupt. We are running out of time. So can you please?
Yeah, I'm just winding up. Hmm?
Yeah,
Yeah.
fine. Thank you, ma'am.
So what
Sorry,
we
sorry.
have, yeah. So let me just conclude then. What I'm trying to say over here is that there is a deliberate attempt by the state as well as by other organizations, institutions, agencies that have tried to undermine history and the historian's craft. And this is by peddling lies and misinformation, by also attempting to claim a glorious historical past where inequalities that are based on caste or gender or other forms of exploitation and suppression are glossed over. We are not to talk about it. Hmm? In the name, therefore, of upholding national pride. So there is this constant iteration of the greatness of the Brahmanical Sanskritic tradition, and within that, the Vedas are given a place of prime importance. And here I'll just come to this one point and then conclude, which is on the conflation of the Indus with the Vedic traditions, where there's a clear obfuscation, or shall we say a misinterpretation, deliberate misinterpretation of the evidence, and merely appending the word Saraswati to Indus cannot alter either the course of the river or rivers or of history. The attempt in such a renaming is to provide an indigeneity to the Aryans in this view, since they, in this view, that is the Aryans, were the composers of the Vedic texts, which was seen as the basis for a Hindu identity. The accepted historical view that has been established through decades of linguistic, archaeological, and historical analysis of sources have distinguished between the urban context of the Indus civilization and the agro-pastoral context revealed by the Vedic texts. More recently, the genetic research that has been done painstakingly by several eminent geneticists also suggests the validity of this distinction. Then again, we also need to think about this particular issue. Cultures and civilizations develop over time through the intermixing of languages, people, practices, and philosophies. And this has been very convincingly argued both at the theoretical level and in terms of the interpretation of historical sources and context. It is with this understanding in mind that I would place before you that what is being carried out in the public domain by state agencies as well as non-state groups is not a revisionist history, and we should not at all get misled by these claims for a revisionist history. It is not a revisionist history, but a historical negation embedded in the dangerous political agenda to claim India as a Hindu nation from time immemorial. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Sorry, I know it's a very vast topic, because like it's really hard to because even in the UGC syllabus, even in the NCRT syllabus, and even the whole level, the history is distorting. So it's really hard to use the topic in a very limited time. But but we have some questions also, ma'am. So let's go through it. We Sorry, because we are running out of time. I will just read out the questions together so you can answer it. Okay, so there's a question from Nikhil. What is Indian knowledge system in the reality? And another question from Ashna Tambi. Why they are neglecting the South Indian history and their contributions? And a question from Nixon. Couldn't find the word secular in the new education document. Do you think they're they're excluding the word secular was on purpose, or was that a mistake? And another question is there a mention of Dalit and feminist criticism in criticism of history? It's by Sri Kumar. And again, another question from him. Indian Valour, Valour, is it masculine history? And okay, this is indeed no doubt that the New Education Policy 2020 attempts to construct the image of history that is monolithic. But how accommodative of diversity is the academia at present? Is the academia at large already guided by a majority nationalism?
Yeah, thank you so much.
No, ma'am, there's some more questions.
Some more.
That's
Oh
a
my
question
God.
from Akhil. Yeah, we
I
have a lot of
noted
questions.
it down. If I had known that there were going to be so many, can you just give me a moment? I'll try and at least jot down some points. Yeah. Just
Yeah.
go ahead.
We have only two. Yeah, okay, ma'am. We have three more questions.
Yeah, go ahead. Tell me.
Yeah, I have it. There's a question from Shurya Su. Is there any history of person with disabilities in the present course, and how can we incorporate perspective of person with disability in our history courses? Another question from Rohan Kumar. Ma'am, do you think there should be a law against publishing distorted history? There should be a law against publishing distorted history. Okay, this is the last question. Actually, New Education Policy 2020 is a shift from interdisciplinary approach to multidisciplinary approach and theoretical study learning. So, how these changes will affect history academic? The question from Ralesh. History in academic. So these are the questions.
Thank you so much. Thank you for those splendid questions. Some of these questions I may not be able to address. For instance, the question on the NEP. As I said, I have looked at the document, but because I do not have the academic wherewithal to really look at it very carefully and critically analyze it, I decided to leave that to those in the field of education. And I'm sure that you have a program slated for tomorrow where Dr. Nandita Narayan will be speaking, and we will get to hear a lot on this issue. So I'm going to leave those questions aside, but only pick up one particular point which relates to secularism and how that word is absent. I wouldn't be surprised at all, because even when talking about the issue of history and why history needs to be brought into school curriculum, there is this constant harping on ancient Indian history and the knowledge that is revealed through certain kinds of religious texts and institutions. So it's not at all surprising to me that a term like secular is absent in this. But as I said, I've not really looked at it that closely. And I will, leave it at that. Now, this issue of the neglect of a particular region and so on is something that one hears often, and it's a double-edged sword. In fact, that is an argument that is being made by those who are seeking this new history. Okay, that there are if you look at the Parliamentary Standing Committee recommendations, one of the issues is that several regions have been neglected, and we need to focus on those, and we need to look at regional or local heroes and bring them into prominence and so on. Now, actually, there's several things happening over here. One of the things is that there is an attempt to draw our attention away, especially in the modern period, from the anti-colonial freedom struggle and to also, to draw our attention away from national leaders and figures like Gandhi, like Ambedkar, like Nehru, like Patel, or Maulana Azad. So the attempt here is really to talk about, uh, taking the focus away from them. And in the name of bringing unsung heroes, those who actually collaborated with the colonial powers, are sought to be rehabilitated, right? And we know that some of these figures wrote letters of apology to the government, asking to be released from jail. Clearly there is this kind of an agenda that is there when talking about the so-called national heroes, the unsung heroes, looking at regions and regional and local heroes and so on. There is this kind of an attempt that is at work. So it's really very interesting that when you pose a question like this about how importance is not being given to regional history, it is at one level a very important point. However, I would argue that actually, if we do look at historical research at a higher level, there has actually been a tremendous shift towards regional histories, the understanding of regions not in a simplistic way. Just like we cannot understand India as a nation as it exists today, and telescope that idea of India into the past. Similarly, the kind of idea of a region that we have today cannot color the way in which we understand regions in the past, right? Historical processes occur in different regions or in different areas, and at particular times of time, at particular points of time, you can see the making of a historical region that occurs because of those processes. So we need to be very careful when we say a Tamil history or a Kerala history. We have to be very mindful of the fact that we had porous borders. The borders that we know of today for Kerala or for Tamil Nadu are not those that we will find in the medieval period or the early medieval period or in the early historic period. So we have to keep this point in mind, and I think that we need to be more nuanced in the way in which we ask this question about bringing the region into the narrative, into the historical narrative. I think it's very important for us as historians. The issue of Dalit and feminist history and disability, the history of disability, these are very, very important questions. And certainly in the case of Dalit as well as feminist scholarship, it has tremendously impacted the way in which scholars have turned their attention, have begun to focus on issues related to caste and gender. And I think without the kinds of inputs that have come from Dalit and feminist theorists and ideologues and scholarship, it would not have been possible for that kind of a shift and that kind of an inclusion that has come about. And of course, the task is not done. There is so much more. As you can see from that PPRC report that I cited, which was used as one of the important documents by the Parliamentary Standing Committee, they don't want to talk about caste. They don't want to talk about gender and gender inequality. So the sections that seek to distort history are trying to undermine the kind of progress we have made as far as historical scholarship is concerned, where such very important areas of inclusion, of exclusion, of discrimination, of exploitation, of structural inequality have been addressed by scholars in recent decades. They want that this is thrown out of the window. This is not brought into textbooks. They feel that children should not be exposed to these kinds of ideas because it will not give them that sense of pride in their society. So these are clearly very important issues, and we need to continue to fight against the exclusion of the issues themselves, just as we need to fight the exclusion of people, men and women, whether it is because of caste or other kinds of disprivileges that they that keep them behind. So we need to fight against these. Thank you. There were too many questions. I'm sorry if
Yeah.
I could not really, condense in my answers replies to all of those questions.
Yeah, ma'am. It's because of the time that we are not able to do anything. So
No
thank you,
problem.
ma'am. So, and also we would like to extend our sincere thanks, because like not because of the not for the lecture, but whenever they are doing all these kind of things, to all this kind of distortion in history, saffronization, and all the historians like Dian Shah is not with us, but we should also mention him. Dian Shah, Romila Tapar.
It was his death
Uh,
anniversary yesterday.
yeah, yesterday also.
Yeah.
Yeah, everyone, each and everyone, and yours also comprehensive view against and comprehensive, like the I mean uncompromising fight against all these kind of things. That's very inspiring. And thank you, ma'am, on behalf of all AIDSO State Committee, AIDSO Kerala State Committee. I would like to extend our sincere thanks and also we are looking forward for more interactions with you. Thank you, ma'am, because a lot of people want to know what's happening in history. So thank you, ma'am. Thanks a lot.
Thank you
Thank
very
you so.
much, Anjali.
Yeah.
It was my pleasure to be here. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you.